We're going lean, Jason Morrison announced, not even sitting down in what was once Robert's office. We don't keep dead weight around here. You're done. I stared at the 32-year-old who had been CEO for precisely 6 hours and 43 minutes. The glossy Stanford Business School diploma hanging behind his desk still had the price tag dangling from the frame. 20 years of dedication reduced to a 10-second dismissal. My hands trembled slightly, but I clasped them tightly in my lap. 54 years of life had taught me one thing. Never let them see you break. I see, I replied, my voice steady despite the earthquake rippling through my chest. May I ask why? Jason's lips curled into what I assumed was his version of a businessman's smile. My father might have needed someone to hold his hand through every contract, but I have a different vision for this company. We're modernizing. Modernizing. The euphemism of the decade for replacing experienced workers with younger, cheaper versions. I nodded slowly, thinking of the personnel files I'd been reviewing before his assistant summoned me. Files that contained, ironically, my own carefully negotiated employment agreement. I'll need this in writing, of course, I said, rising from the visitor's chair. HR will have something for you to sign on the way out, Jason said dismissively, already turning to his computer. Security will escort you to clear your desk. Standard procedure. Standard procedure. As if there was anything standard about discarding someone who had helped build this company for 2 decades. Of course. Thank you for the opportunity to work here. Confusion flickered across Jason's face at my composure, but he quickly masked it with another practiced smile. Best of luck, Sarah. As I walked to the elevator, past the shocked faces of my team, I felt 20 pairs of eyes on my back. I didn't stop to explain. There would be time for goodbyes later. Right now, I needed to focus on the document folded in my bag, the one Jason clearly hadn't bothered to read. In the car, breaking point, in my car, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, tears blurring my vision. 20 years. 20 goddamn years of my life, of missed birthdays and school plays, of late nights and early mornings, of solving impossible problems and saving millions for the company, all erased by a boy who'd never known a day of hardship in his privileged life. I fumbled for my phone, dialing the one person who would understand. After 3 rings, she picked up. Mom? Aren't you supposed to be at work? My daughter's voice, clear and concerned, brought fresh tears to my eyes. Liz, honey. My voice cracked. I just got fired. What? By Robert? That's impossible. Not Robert. His son Jason. Robert retired last week, remember? There was a pause. Oh, Mom. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I wiped my eyes, looking at myself in the rearview mirror. Crow's feet, gray strands in my brown hair, the slight sag beneath my chin, physical evidence of the very experienced Jason Morrison had just deemed obsolete. I will be, I said, my resolve returning. Remember that contract Robert and I negotiated 3 years ago? The one with the golden parachute clause? The one that pays out if you're fired without cause? Liz asked. She'd inherited my memory for details. Exactly. I don't think our new CEO bothered to read my file before deciding my fate. Liz laughed, a sound that always lifted my spirits. Oh, Mom. He has no idea who he's dealing with, does he? No, I smiled, opening my bag to pull out the contract. He really doesn't. Flashback, 9 years ago. My introduction to Morrison Materials happened 9 years ago when I was 45 and determined to rebuild my life. After my second divorce left me emotionally drained but financially responsible for putting Liz through college, I needed stability. With my law degree and focus on contract law, I applied to every major company in New England that might need someone to review their agreements. Robert Morrison had personally interviewed me, a rarity for the CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company. He was in his late 50s then, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that had seen both success and hardship. Your attention to detail is impressive, he'd said, reviewing my sample contract revisions. Most lawyers just rubber stamp whatever we put in front of them. I need someone who will tell me when I'm about to step in it. Well, I've never been accused of holding back my opinions, I replied, earning a genuine laugh from him. Sarah Bennett, he'd said, extending his hand. I think you're exactly what this company needs. I was hired the next day. Over the years, I became more than a contract specialist. I was the one Robert called when a supplier threatened to pull out, when a major client was unhappy, when the company needed to navigate complex regulatory changes. I rewrote agreements that saved millions, spotted loopholes that would have cost the company dearly, and eventually earned my place at Robert's right hand. What I didn't know then was how much Robert's faith in me would reshape my life, or how quickly his son would try to unravel it all. At home, strategy planning, that evening, I spread my employment agreement across my dining room table, alongside the termination notice HR had hastily printed for me. My name was misspelled, Sarah Bennett instead of Bennett, a small but telling oversight that reflected the carelessness of my dismissal. My fingers traced the golden parachute clause that Robert had insisted on 3 years ago when Williamson Supplies tried to poach me with an offer that made my eyes water. Robert counted with not just matching pay, but an employment agreement that reflected how much he valued my contributions, a full year's severance, equity options, and most importantly, a trigger clause that paid out $250,000 if I was ever terminated without cause. Your family now, Sarah, Robert had told me as we signed the agreement. This company wouldn't be what it is without you. I believed him. And for 3 more years, I gave Morrison Materials everything I had. I'd watch Liz graduate medical school via FaceTime because I was closing a deal in Chicago. I'd postponed vacations, worked weekends, and prioritized the company's needs above my own comfort countless times. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol, my assistant at Morrison. Are you okay? Everyone is in shock. Robert is flying back tomorrow. I hadn't expected that. Robert was supposed to be on a month-long cruise celebrating his retirement. For him to cut that short meant Jason had likely shared the news of my departure. I'm fine, I replied, just surprised at the timing. Jason called an all-hands meeting to announce a new direction for the company. Said he's bringing in his own team from Stanford. That explained it. Jason wasn't just firing me. He was dismantling everything his father had built piece by piece. I thought of Robert, who had started the company from nothing, who had worked 16-hour days for decades, who had created jobs for hundreds of people, and now his son was tearing it down in less than a week. I set my phone aside and walked to the window. The April evening was cool, cherry blossoms just beginning to bloom in my small garden. At 54, I had thought my career path was set. Now I was facing an unexpected crossroads. With a renewed sense of purpose, I picked up my phone again and dialed a familiar number. Joseph Williams, answered the voice on the other end. Joseph, it's Sarah Bennett. Sarah. To what do I owe the pleasure? How are things at Morrison? I took a deep breath. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I was terminated today. There was a pause. You're kidding. Robert fired you? Not Robert. Jason. Robert retired last week. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Well, his loss is someone else's gain. As a matter of fact. Flashback, watching Jason. In the weeks before Robert's last day, I had noticed Jason watching me during meetings, his expression calculating. He was handsome in that polished way of privileged young men who've never had to doubt themselves. I knew his type. I'd been married to one in my 20s. All confidence on the surface, crushing insecurity underneath. When I presented the quarterly compliance report, highlighting potential risks the company needed to address, he had dismissed my concerns as excessive caution that was holding the company back. Robert had defended my thoroughness, but I saw the writing on the wall. Jason viewed me as his father's right hand, not his own. I understood why. I had watched him grow up, from a defiant teenager who resented his father's long hours at the office to a young man desperate to prove himself. Robert had confided in me once, after Jason left for Stanford, about his worries for his only son. He's brilliant, Sarah, but he's never known struggle, Robert had said, gazing at a family photo on his desk. His mother spoiled him after we lost her sister in that accident. I was too busy building the company to counterbalance it. And now, he trailed off, but I understood the unspoken concern. Jason had book smarts but lacked the wisdom that comes from overcoming adversity. I had started updating my resume that night. What I hadn't expected was the abruptness of my dismissal. No warning, no transition period, not even a pretense of restructuring. Just, you're done, from a man who had been handed everything his father had built. Morrison Materials. The return. I arrived at Morrison Materials just after 9 the next morning, not as an employee, but as someone with unfinished business. The receptionist did a double take when I walked through the glass doors, wearing the same professional attire I'd worn every day for 9 years. Ms. Bennett, I thought. I mean, we heard. Is Robert in? I asked calmly. Her eyes widened. Yes, he came in early. He's with Jason in the conference room, but I don't think. Thank you, Jennifer. I smiled and headed toward the elevator, my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. As the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, I could hear the shouting before I even stepped out. Robert's voice, normally so controlled, echoed down the hallway. Did you even read her agreement before firing her? I approached the conference room slowly, noting the small crowd of executives and assistants who had gathered at a safe distance, pretending to be busy while straining to hear the confrontation. Carol spotted me first, her eyes growing wide. She hurried over. Sarah, what are you doing here? I have a meeting, I said simply. With who? Jason's in there getting the lecture of a lifetime from his father. Apparently, Robert cut his cruise short when he heard what happened. I nodded, unsurprised. Robert had always been hands-on, and despite his official retirement, he wasn't the type to sail into the sunset while his company changed course. The conference room door flew open, and Jason stormed out, his face flushed with anger, which quickly drained to shock when he saw me standing there. What are you doing here? He demanded. Before I could answer, Robert appeared behind him. Unlike his son, Robert looked pleased to see me, though the dark circles under his eyes revealed his exhaustion. Sarah, perfect timing. Please join us. He gestured for me to enter the conference room, then turned to the gathered audience. The rest of you, back to work. Inside, the long conference table was covered with papers, including, I noticed, several copies of my employment agreement. Beside them sat Patricia Clark, the head of HR, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Ms. Clark was just explaining to Jason why your termination might be problematic, Robert said, closing the door behind us. Patricia cleared her throat. As I was saying, the agreement Ms. Bennett signed 3 years ago included several protections, including, I know what it includes, I interjected smoothly. 1 year of severance at my current salary, immediate vesting of all outstanding stock options, a non-compete waiver, and a clause granting me full rights to consult for any competitor I choose. I paused, making sure Jason was looking at me before continuing, and a $250,000 early termination payout if fired without cause. Jason's face cycled through several emotions. Disbelief, then anger, then something close to panic. That can't be right, he said, grabbing one of the copies and flipping through it frantically. Page 7, paragraph 4, I offered helpfully. The negotiation. Robert turned to me, his expression softening. Sarah, I want to apologize for my son's actions. Your termination is rescinded effective immediately. Your position, your office, everything will be restored. I had anticipated this, of course. Robert was nothing if not loyal to those who had served him well. But loyalty wasn't what had brought me back to Morrison Materials that morning. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've already accepted a position elsewhere. The silence that followed my announcement was broken only by the sound of Jason dropping the agreement onto the table. Where? Robert asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. Williamson Supplies, I replied. I start next Monday as their Director of Contract Management and Compliance. Jason let out a sharp laugh. You can't. Your non-compete was waived upon termination without cause, I reminded him. Page 9, paragraph 2. Robert sank into a chair, looking suddenly older than his 68 years. You've been planning this. No, I said honestly. But when the opportunity presented itself, I would have been foolish not to take it. They'll want our client list, our pricing structures, Jason began, panic edging into his voice. I raised an eyebrow. All things I'm legally entitled to use. given how my employment was terminated. I turned to Robert. Though I should mention that my agreement with Williamson specifically excludes using proprietary information from Morrison. Joseph Williams may be a competitor, but he's not without ethics. Robert nodded, unsurprised. He and Joseph had known each other for decades, rivals who respected each other's boundaries. What do you want, Sarah? Robert asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. Excuse me? You could have simply taken the payout and started your new job. You didn't need to come back here. So what do you want? I considered his question carefully. What did I want? Revenge? Satisfaction? An apology from the arrogant young man who had dismissed 20 years of dedicated service in less than a minute? As I looked at Robert's face, lined with decades of stress and decision-making, I suddenly remembered my own father. He'd worked at the same factory for 30 years, only to be let go when a new manager decided to cut costs. He never recovered from that betrayal, and the memory of his broken spirit had fueled my determination to succeed. I want what I'm owed, I said finally, and I want to make sure the people who still work here are treated fairly. Jason scoffed. This is a business, not a charity. Your father built this business by valuing his employees, I counted. That's why Morrison Materials has one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry. It's why your suppliers are loyal even when competitors offer lower prices. It's why clients trust Morrison to deliver even when timelines are tight. Robert was watching me with a thoughtful expression. You care about this company. I gave 20 years of my life to it, I acknowledged. I'd prefer not to see that work undone in 20 days. The proposal. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. A consulting arrangement. I'll help with the transition of my duties, advise on pending contracts, and provide insights on key client relationships. In return, I received the compensation outlined in my termination clause, plus a consulting fee. Robert picked up the folder and skimmed its contents, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You've thought this through. It's what you hired me to do, I reminded him. He handed the folder to Jason. Read it carefully this time. Jason accepted the folder reluctantly, his expression sullen as he read. His eyes widened slightly at certain points, and I knew he was recognizing the strategic value of what I was offering, despite his wounded pride. This would give her access to our operations, even while she works for Williamson, he objected. With strict confidentiality provisions, I pointed out, and a clear delineation of what constitutes proprietary information. Joseph is aware of this arrangement and has approved it. Robert looked impressed. You've already cleared this with Williamson? It was a condition of my acceptance, I confirmed. They get my expertise without the ethical complications. Jason tossed the folder back onto the table. This is blackmail. No, Robert corrected him, his voice sharp. This is negotiation, something you would understand if you had taken the time to learn the business instead of assuming you could run it based on theory alone. The tension between father and son was palpable, years of unspoken expectations and resentment suddenly laid bare in the sterile conference room. Patricia excused herself quietly, leaving the three of us alone with the aftermath of Jason's hasty decision. I'll need time to review this proposal, Robert said, closing the folder. Of course, I replied, but I should mention that my offer to help with the transition expires at the end of the day. After that, the only communication will be through lawyers regarding my termination package. Jason's face reddened. You're giving us an ultimatum. I'm being practical, I corrected him. My new position requires my full attention, and Williamson has already been generous in allowing this arrangement. I won't ask them to wait indefinitely. Robert studied my face, searching for something, resentment, perhaps, or vindictiveness. Finding neither, he nodded slowly. You were always fair, Sarah, even when you had every reason not to be. He turned to his son. Jason, step outside. I need a moment with Sarah. A private moment. Jason looked as though he wanted to object, but something in his father's expression stopped him. With a final glare in my direction, he left the conference room, closing the door with controlled force behind him. He has potential, Robert said once we were alone, but he lacks patience and humility. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. I thought giving him the reins would force him to grow up. I see now that was a mistake. It's not my place to comment on your decisions regarding Jason, I said carefully. Robert smiled ruefully. That's diplomatic of you, but we both know this isn't how I wanted things to end between Morrison Materials and Sarah Bennett. I felt a twinge of nostalgia for the years I'd spent at the company, the challenges we'd overcome, the victories we'd celebrated. For a moment, I was transported back to all the late nights working alongside Robert, solving impossible problems together, the mutual respect that had defined our professional relationship. Business is business, I said, echoing a phrase Robert himself had often used. Indeed. He picked up my consulting proposal again. I'll sign this, and I'll make sure Jason understands the terms and the consequences of violating them. He paused, studying me with eyes that had lost none of their sharpness despite his age. But before you go, I want to ask you something off the record. I nodded, curious. What would it take to bring you back? Not now, but eventually, once things are settled? The question took me by surprise. I thought of my daughter Liz, how proud she had been when I told her about the offer from Williamson. You deserve a place that values you, Mom, she'd said. I thought of all the times I'd sacrificed for Morrison, the family events missed, the vacations postponed. Honestly, I don't know, I replied. Williamson is offering opportunities I hadn't considered before, and after what happened, trust is difficult to rebuild. But not impossible, Robert acknowledged. Morrison would need to change the culture, the leadership approach. Your son would need to demonstrate that he values the people who make this company work, not just the bottom line. That's a tall order. You asked what it would take, I reminded him. Robert laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily erased the tension of the morning. So I did. He extended his hand. No matter what happens next, it's been an honor working with you, Sarah. I shook his hand, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. Likewise, Robert. As I turned to leave, Robert called after me. Sarah, one more thing. I paused at the door. Jason will hate this, but I'm going to insist he attend your transition meetings personally. Consider it part of his education. I couldn't help but smile. That seems appropriate. New beginnings. The following Monday, I walked into Williamson Supplies' gleaming headquarters as their new director of contract management and compliance. My office overlooked downtown, a far cry from the windowless space I'd occupied at Morrison. Joseph Williams himself showed me around, introducing me to the team and outlining my responsibilities. I've been trying to get you over here for years, he said as we settled into his office for a coffee, though I have to admit the circumstances are surprising. Life is full of unexpected turns, I replied diplomatically. Joseph chuckled. That's one way of putting it. The consulting arrangement with Morrison. That was clever. Gets us your expertise while avoiding messy legal battles. It was the right thing to do, I said. Robert built that company from nothing. I respect that, even if I disagree with how his son is running things. Speaking of which, Joseph leaned forward, his expression turning serious. The first transition meeting is tomorrow. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. I've compiled detailed handover notes for all my active projects. The goal is to ensure a smooth transition, not to create problems. And Jason? How do you think he'll handle it? I thought of the sullen young man who had dismissed me so casually, who was now forced to learn from the very person he had deemed obsolete. Poorly at first, but Robert will keep him in line. Joseph seemed satisfied with my answer. Good. The last thing we need is unnecessary drama. Later that evening, as I prepared dinner in my apartment, my phone rang with a FaceTime call from Liz. Mom, how was your first day at the new job? Her face filled the screen, her smile so like mine before time had carved its lines around my mouth. Wonderful, I said, realizing I meant it. My office has an actual window, can you believe it? After 20 years at Morrison? That's the least they could do. She laughed. I'm so proud of you, Mom. Most people would have just taken the payout and licked their wounds. I thought of my father again, how deflated he'd become after losing his job, how he'd never quite recovered his sense of self-worth. I'm not most people, I said. No, you're not, Liz agreed. You're Sarah Bennett, and you taught me that when someone underestimates you, that's their mistake to regret. As we chatted about her work at the hospital and her upcoming visit, I felt a profound gratitude for this brilliant, compassionate woman I'd raised largely on my own. Whatever mistakes I'd made in my marriages, whatever sacrifices my career had demanded, Liz was proof that I'd done something right. The final meeting over the next 2 months, I divided my time between establishing myself at Williamson and fulfilling my consulting obligations to Morrison. The transition meetings became less tense as Jason gradually realized the value of what I was sharing. He began asking questions, sometimes even taking notes, a far cry from the dismissive attitude he displayed on his first day as CEO. During our final scheduled meeting, Jason approached me as I was gathering my materials. "I underestimated you," he said, his tone measured, "and I misjudged the situation." I looked up, surprised by what sounded like an apology. "We all make mistakes, especially when we're new to a role." Jason frowned slightly. "That's what my father says, but it's not an excuse." "No," I agreed. "It's not, but acknowledging the mistake is the first step toward not repeating it." He seemed to consider this. "The consulting agreement expires next week?" "Yes." "Would you consider extending it?" "On a more limited basis, of course." "Just for the most complex contracts?" I hadn't expected this request. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, given my position at Williamson." "I've already discussed it with Joseph Williams," Jason admitted. "He's open to it, provided there are clear boundaries." This was news to me. I made a mental note to speak with Joseph as soon as I returned to my office. "Why me? There are other consultants with contract expertise." Jason's expression was reluctant but honest. "Because you know our business, and because I need to prove to my father that I can learn from my mistakes." I studied him, looking for signs of the arrogance that had characterized our previous interactions. Instead, I saw something new, a humility that hadn't been there before. I thought of my own son-in-law, how Liz had described his growth from an arrogant medical student to a thoughtful doctor who respected his nurse's input. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I can promise." Jason nodded, accepting this partial victory. "That's fair." As I left Morrison Materials for what might be the last time, I reflected on how differently things had turned out from what I had initially expected. I had walked away with not just financial compensation, but with my professional reputation enhanced and, surprisingly, a measure of respect from the very person who had dismissed me. At 54, I had feared my career might be ending. Instead, it had taken an unexpected turn that opened new opportunities I wouldn't have considered otherwise. The agreement that Jason had failed to read had changed the course of my career in ways I never could have anticipated. Epilogue. 6 months later, the maple outside my apartment window had turned a brilliant red, signaling the arrival of New England autumn. 6 months had passed since my abrupt departure from Morrison Materials, and life had settled into a new and unexpected rhythm. At Williamson, I was thriving. My intimate knowledge of the industry had allowed me to identify opportunities for growth that others had missed. Joseph was pleased with my work, and I had already been given additional responsibilities beyond my initial role. I had also continued a limited consulting relationship with Morrison, focusing only on their most complex international contracts. Jason and I had developed a cautious professional respect, his initial arrogance tempered by the realization that experience couldn't be replaced by theory alone. As I prepared dinner, I heard a key in the lock. Liz was visiting from Boston for the weekend. She swept in, bringing the crisp autumn air and her boundless energy with her. "Mom, something smells amazing." She hugged me tightly before dropping her bag by the door. "Just pasta with grandma's sauce," I said, returning her embrace. "How was the drive?" "Not bad. I listened to that podcast you recommended about women in corporate America." She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. "It made me think of you." The host was talking about how women over 50 are often pushed out of their jobs despite being at the peak of their expertise. I stirred the sauce, thinking of that day 6 months ago when Jason had so casually dismissed me. Well, sometimes being underestimated is actually an advantage. Liz smiled. "The Sarah Bennett principle. When they think you're finished, show them you're just getting started." Later, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Liz asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you ever regret not going back to Morrison when Robert offered?" "It was your home for so long." I considered her question carefully. No, I said finally. I love that company, but sometimes you need to leave home to truly find yourself again. I gazed at the sunset, remembering the windowless office I'd occupied for so many years. At Williamson, I'm valued for my experience, not despite it. And I've rediscovered parts of myself that got lost along the way. Like having dinner with your daughter on a Friday night instead of working late? Liz teased. Exactly. I squeezed her hand. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of what I accomplished at Morrison. But I've learned that sometimes a door closing is just the universe's way of directing you to a better one. Pretty wise for someone Jason Morrison thought was dead weight, Liz said with a smirk. I laughed. Well, his education continues. I heard from Robert last week. Apparently, Jason tried to fire two more senior executives and discovered they had similar clauses in their contracts. No way. What happened? Robert stepped back in temporarily as chairman of the board. Jason's still CEO, but with supervision. Liz raised her wine glass. To my brilliant mother, who taught an arrogant CEO the most expensive lesson of his career. I clinked my glass against hers. To unexpected new beginnings at any age. As the last light faded from the sky, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. At 54, when many women are told their best years are behind them, I had found new strength, new purpose, and a renewed appreciation for the wisdom that only comes with experience. Sometimes, I thought, the most powerful revenge isn't about tearing someone down. It's about rising so high they have no choice but to look up at you.